Okay. Okay, we're live. So thank you, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're from around the world. And thank you for joining us. And welcome to the last day of week 3 of the MOOC, where we've been looking at teaching and learning online. And to keep in with that theme, we are having an online synchronous discussion via Google Hangout to explore some of the themes and some of the issues of the week. And in this chat we're going to look at specifically, I think, at social media for language learning. I'm joined, as you can see probably at the bottom of your screen there, by Kate Borthwick, who is the learning designer for this course and works at Southampton University. Not next to her, but on my screen, but possibly next to her on your screen, is Neil McLaren, who's a social media manager for the British Council's Learn English websites. And we also have Chris Baldwin and David Gattrell, who are managers for the British Council's online courses. So welcome to you four, and thank you for joining us, and welcome again to everybody around the world who's joined us. I'll give you a little bit of an outline of the format and how this is going to work. Each of Kate, Chris, Neil, and David will talk for about 4 or 5 minutes. And introduce themselves in a little bit more detail than I did, and then talk about a particular aspect of social media and language learning that they've chosen to focus on. While that's going on, Manuel Leon in Southampton and myself in Barcelona will be looking at the YouTube chat and the step on the MOOC for questions and feeding those in as the chat progresses after each of Kate, Neil, David, and Chris have given their little introductions and done their talks. So we'll have probably about, I guess it'll be about sort of 20 minutes or so of them talking. So please listen, obviously, and feed in any questions that you have, type them into the chat. And then we'll have about another 20-25 minutes to deal with those questions and look through those and discuss those. Okay, so Chris, I think we're going to start with you. So if you'd like to just introduce yourself in a little bit more detail than I did, and over to you.
Sure, thanks, Paul. I'm going to say good evening to everyone because I'm in Hong Kong. It's 8 at night in this part of the world, but I'm sure we've got people I can say good morning to and good afternoon to as well. It's always an enjoyable thing about these global online meetings. So as Paul said, I work for the British Council. I manage the development and delivery of some of our online teacher development courses, and also for some of the online platforms that we have for learners too. So we're going to be talking about social media and language learning now. So I'm going to sort of kick off just by thinking initially about what we actually mean by social media. I noticed in the step there was a question from Claire Marie Roche, and she made the point that I'm not going to sort of discuss the full detail of the question, but she was talking about social media as being sort of Facebook and Schoology, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a learning management system, as being kind of something different. To my way of thinking, Schoology and other learning management systems are just one other aspect of social media. Really, social media can go back to any form of communication, even before computers were around. Just when you talk, that's a form of social network, talking to your friends. So, of course, with the internet, social media on the internet, we tend to think of it being something more than just that. But really, it's just something. It's just a tool or set of tools that can allow you to communicate, but communicate with more people than we used to be able to in the pre-internet era. So, social media can be any way of communicating online. Of course, Facebook is a very popular example. Learning management systems can be used in a sort of in a social way. Things like Moodle, Schoology, Desire to Learn, these kinds of platforms. Also, of course, Twitter is very famous. LinkedIn is another social network. We're using YouTube, Google Hangouts. People don't think of it as a social network, but it can be a kind of a social network as well. So what does it actually mean pedagogically? Well, the difference, I was thinking, between sort of traditional sort of offline social interactions and online is the fact that here, I'm not sure if somebody can tell us how many people are actually listening to this now, but probably talking to a few hundred, sort of 100-odd people. It's very difficult to do that. Maybe you can get people all together in one room, but of course online we can do this around the world. Also, people can then watch the recording as well. So that's the difference. This is a one-to-many form of communication. Also, of course, in social media, I'm sure there's the back channel, there's the chat going on YouTube at the moment, and that's a many-to-many form of communication. So different forms of communication which weren't available or very difficult without using the internet and computers. Thinking more about the pedagogy, connectivism is something which I know has been discussed a lot. I really find that connectivism is a fascinating concept. In terms of connectivism and social media in language learning, of course, the concept of connectivism is you've got different nodes of learning, sort of one piece of knowledge or sort of competency thing you need to learn here, another node of learning here, another node of learning here. So you're in terms of social media, maybe one node of learning is your course book in the face-to-face classroom. Another node of learning is your friends on Facebook. You can talk to about it. Another node of learning is is LinkedIn. Another node of learning, maybe offline, is the person who sits next to you in the staff room just when you're chatting. So social media on the internet can just give lots of extra nodes of learning in this sort of connectivist pedagogical viewpoint. Also like to think briefly about the role of the teacher, so how the role of the teacher can change throughout the use of social media. We often talk about the sage on the stage as the traditional model of the teacher. So the sage on the stage is the teacher sitting on the stage and talking, and the students sat there and making notes and listening. The more sort of social media aware approach is the guide on the side, where the teacher sort of steps back a little bit, and steps back and to the side, so the teacher watches these interactions going on in the physical classroom, but also online social media. The teacher can be watching what kinds of interactions, how the students are communicating, and then give guidance. So help in terms of improving communicative competence in these social media channels. Another huge benefit is the opportunities to practice which are given by social media. Maybe you live in one country, there are not many people who speak English or whatever other language you're learning where you live. Of course, online through social networks, there's a huge opportunity to go there and actually use the language in real communication online. So it really gives you a massive opportunity to use what you're studying and what you're teaching. So of course teachers can then set up these opportunities. Think about things like sort of connecting classrooms approaches in for teaching school-aged children. So you can have set up a channel where you're talking to the other people, another classroom around the world, and that's kind of using these sort of social media type of tools, which you can do either synchronously, so you're actually talking in real time to people, or of course asynchronously, where you can maybe put sort of messages in a forum on a social network, and then go in and check back later to see what the responses were. So that's just a brief overview of some of the things that I wanted to mention. So maybe I can pass back to Paul now. So if we have any questions we'd like to discuss.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I have knowledge, obviously, of connectivism, but the idea that you were talking about there with the nodes of learning, I found very interesting. I think, if we look at it in that way, then obviously social media, the sort of the advantages perhaps of social media are that it expands those the number of nodes that are there available. I guess, I think probably one of the things that I've kind of always felt with this sort of theory, and perhaps with the idea of the increased nodes is how you sort of filter that, and how you kind of get to what you want quickly, because obviously when we're kind of wanting to learn something, sometimes the wealth of knowledge that's out there is almost overwhelming. So with the addition about how people can filter, and how people can maybe kind of take those nodes and filter it down to something that they can access effectively and quickly. I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the role of the teacher, isn't it? So the teacher and also online materials developers to be able to develop tools to use to use social media effectively to teach and to learn.
Okay, and there's a few questions on the coming through the YouTube channel at the moment. Just one from Gio here about what kinds of social media are more appropriate in a learning process. I just wondered if anyone wanted to kind of talk about their experiences of what platforms they found to be most effective.
I might come on to talk about this in just a minute.
Okay.
And as I think will I when I come to talk about our current activities.
Okay.
There's something, I want to mention later as well. So,
so that question is taken care of.
Can I just say, picking up on something that was just being said, we had just looking at my notes, we had a comment in the week from Alejandro Guzman that was connected to that notion of how can we filter and how can we use all these nodes of information to our benefit, and what would be our main advice on that. I was thinking about that, and I thought, yes, there is too much, and certainly one of the things that I recommend is to set aside days, moments in your day, say half an hour in the morning, half an hour at lunchtime, half an hour in the evening, to do things like have a look at Twitter, do things like Facebook, and then really kind of be strict with yourself. Otherwise, you can get into a situation where you're actually being quite passive a lot of the time. You're just responding to things that you see coming into you from Twitter or Facebook or other kind of social media. Obviously, if you're posting, there is a creative and active element to it, but there is a risk that you end up being responsive rather than creative and active. So certainly in a work environment, I try and restrict my...
broken up a little bit there.
Okay, so in a work environment, I try to restrict my engagement with it to different times of the day. I don't know what advice others in the group would give to that question about filtering all the information out there.
Okay, but I think obviously we'll kind of come back to that. I think, David, if I could move over to you then, as you said, I think he was in what you're going to, so cut you off there. But David, if I could pass over to you, and if you could just introduce yourself briefly there and
all right. So, hi everyone. I'm Dave Gattrell, and I'm one of the tutors on your course. My background's in English language teaching and teacher training, and now I work with Chris in online teacher development with the British Council. And I'd like to talk about how different types of social media can be used as part of formal and informal language teaching and learning. First of all, social media allows for personalized, self-directed learning, and by that I mean learners can focus on topics and aspects of their learning that are of particular interest to them, and they can do it wherever, whenever they want, using the modes of communication that suit them. And the second key thing for me about social media is it enables language learners to take part in meaningful, authentic communication and interact with people from other backgrounds in the target language. Finally, for teachers, I think it's important to integrate social media into our teaching because it's something that many or all of our learners do in the real world. So what are some practical things you can do using social media as teachers and learners? Social networking sites are hugely popular among young learners and adults alike. And this week, a lot of people like Carol Nuttall and Ramona Diana Sinvelliu have been asking how we can use Facebook with our learners. A lot of people, something a lot of people do is set up a closed class Facebook group to help you and other learners get to know each other, using profiles created specially for your course. Creating and developing an online presence is a really valuable skill to learn. And members of your group can post regular status updates in English, directing each other to useful content. Or you can do this by following particular groups and organizations. You could also get learners to share their work, presentations, stories or posters, anything they've created in your class or outside the classroom, and ask other people to comment and vote on their favourites using the like button. Or why not have a debate about a topic on your syllabus and use a poll to vote at the end? Or invite learners to talk about important events in their lives using their timelines or look back videos to put different past tenses in context. Social networking sites are also great for keeping track of important events on your course. If you or your students are learning business English or ESP, you might like to try using LinkedIn. Writing a profile on LinkedIn is a really meaningful real-world task, as it can act as an online CV. Learners could advise each other on how to do this and give each other feedback on what they've written. You or your learners could join interest groups related to your field or organisation and take part in discussions developing useful business skills while developing language skills. In your classroom, learners could give a presentation on important developments within their field of work or within an organisation they've chosen to follow on LinkedIn. But bear in mind that while learners might use these social networking sites in their everyday lives, they might not want to use the same tools for formal learning. Another key issue is that we need to provide a safe learning environment for young learners. When you're using social networking sites, there are important issues we need to be aware of, such as privacy and data protection, as well as the risk of identity theft and cyberbullying. Don't forget, children under 13 can't get a Facebook account, and this is where education-focused social networking tools like Schoology and Edmodo come in. If you teach children or teenagers, you can use these platforms to accomplish many of the same things you can with Facebook, but in a secure environment. And that's something that Claire Marie Roche has talked about. How about other types of social media? Social bookmarking sites like Pinterest have tremendous potential when it comes to sharing resources between teachers and learners. You can pin images, stories, or videos to different boards for different topics and have other people access them. And this makes it ideal for collaborating on group projects and connecting with learners in other parts of the world. If you're a teacher, some projects you may like to try with your learners include organising an event, designing a new classroom, or choosing a present for another student. Learners can use different boards to collect their ideas and give each other feedback on their suggestions. I know a lot of participants on this course are keen Twitter users, and it's brilliant that people like Alma, Andres, and Miguel have been using this microblogging platform to discuss different topics over the past 3 weeks. Twitter is a really useful tool for developing as a teacher, as you can use it to build up a personalized community of educators and share ideas about a topic. You can use it to build up a community of educators and share ideas with them. You can use it with your learners as well. Why not use Twitter to brainstorm ideas about a topic you're studying using hashtags to organize them within the group? You could also ask learners to track new vocabulary related to a topic, so they get tweets showing these words in context. Or follow a famous person for a week and tell the class what they've been up to. Twitter can be great for developing writing skills, and here the strict limit of 140 characters can actually encourage learners to be pretty creative. Some activities you could try include writing captions for photos, summarizing events, articles, and films in a single tweet, or even creating accounts for characters from a book or play, and then having students tweet about the characters' experiences. Finally, Twitter is good for getting learners to reflect on what they've learned, perhaps using images or videos to help remember new concepts in language. And it's also good for collecting feedback during and after a lesson. So I wonder if anyone's tweeting about this session right now. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Dave. I think they are. There are people tweeting, and very interesting. Yeah, thanks. That's great. I mean, lots of really practical ideas, which I think a lot of the time people want. I mean, obviously there's lots of pedagogy and lots of theory involved, but ultimately, I think if we're teachers in either teaching online or teaching in a classroom in a blended situation or face-to-face situation, then looking at how we can use the technology and how we can use social media platforms for for language learning, which is what we're talking about, is great. I just wondered that there was a question from Moldy Abuda, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, about social media, about applying social media. And the question is there a specific methodology? I mean, obviously you've been talking about ideas, but I just wondered, what your thoughts were about that. Is there a specific methodology to apply social media in teaching, or are we sort of still at the exploratory stage where that hasn't really come out yet?
I think, Neil, do you want to go ahead and answer this one, or can I go ahead?
Go ahead.
I think there isn't a method as such, but I think a lot of what Chris was saying about connectivism is a good approach to take, guiding students to resources that would be of interest to them and support their learning needs. I think when we're in the classroom, social media can form part of task-based learning that we talked about last week. I was talking about the task of organizing an event using social media. There are lots of really meaningful tasks you can do. And also connecting language learning to the real world and meaningful communication. I think a lot of that comes in. Perhaps other people have got more to add.
Sorry, I muted my mic there because the neighbour's dog was barking. Sorry, Chris, over to you.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as well as task-based learning that you mentioned, Dave, you can really use any of the traditional methodologies in the social media online environment. I mean, the PPP presentation, was it practice production? You can use really any of those stages. You could build into a sort of social media tool, any or all. The old traditional grammar translation. My mum learnt French using grammar translation 50-odd years ago, and she can still speak it. So it went out of fashion, but it seems to be coming back into fashion these days with Duolingo, which is basically a technological way of using a grammar translation for language learning. So how effective it will be remains to be seen. But I think you can use any methodology within reason in sort of the online environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the heart of it for me as a teacher is always, what do you want to achieve with your students? What's your learning outcome going to be? How do you want to engage your students? How do you want to get them producing authentic dialogue and practicing? And then you consider what kind of methodology or what kind of tool suits you. And in that sense, you're always thinking about the pedagogy, but you're not maybe perhaps getting fixated on one particular method or one particular approach. You're just looking at it all, and you're cherry picking the best bits to help you achieve the best outcome for your students.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that as well. That's pretty good advice. I think we all do that, don't we? Anyway, in our teaching, it's not one single methodology that we use. Neil, I don't know if you wanted to comment, or should we move on to the next presentation?
Who's the next presentation?
I think it's you, actually.
Okay, well in that case, we'll kill two birds with one stone.
Seamlessly linked in there, beautiful.
Okay, beautiful segue. So as you mentioned at the beginning, my job is a social community manager for British Council, and I work together with a small team of people, and we handle the main global social media channels for the British Council, which, when we're talking about which social media channels are appropriate, then that's a good question, because there's different purposes, different ones suitable for different things. David mentioned earlier things like Edmodo and Schoology and things like that, which are great for closed groups for classes and within specific courses and specific teachers. Our role is slightly different. Our role is to basically reach the widest audience and to connect the largest number of people possible globally. And to those ends, we have something like, for example, on Facebook alone at the moment, I think our total audience across teaching English, learn English teens and learn English kids is around 6.25 million, which is a reasonably sizable audience to reach within that. And for example, each of these channels, that we work on Facebook primarily. We also use Twitter. Of course, we have our YouTube channels, which we're using in our other courses, and we use for seminars and for broadcasting things like this Google Hangout or other Google Hangouts that we do to do this. Those are the main channels that we use. We also have experimented with other things like Pinterest and so on, but our goal is really to be where the audience is and to get there, rather than to create a space and bring the audience to it. And that's why for us Facebook is the channel which works best. We have 3 million people on Teaching English, 2 million people on Learn English, and regularly posts reach 500,000 people or more. And that type of audience is a valuable resource for everyone who's involved within that. What do we use it for? That's the question. How do we use it? That comes back to some of the questions you were talking earlier about nodes, about also filtering. We have basically 2 main functions, perhaps 3. Each day we share resources, not just our own British Council resources, but we seek the best, newest resources which are out there. We curate them, we share them, we package them together in ways which we hope will benefit learners and which allow them to then, as we talked earlier, to personalise things and to follow their own direction within that. And we do that to quite a large extent. I mean, we're posting several times a day with different resources, practical resources, online resources, downloadable resources, etc., various things that work with that. We answer questions on a daily basis. We receive literally hundreds of questions per day from all around the world, related from from elementary level learners asking simple grammar or vocabulary questions, up to postgraduate students asking detailed questions about language, about the nuance, about specific writing skills, and so on. And because we have this large community, we're able to connect people together quite easily. So it's not just us. Perhaps not the sage on the stage, but the sage on the screen, or whatever you would say with that. We're not just that either. What we do is we bring other people together and expertise from other areas. So we encourage a sense of community. So all of our members, after a period of, let's say, socialization, where they become comfortable in the environment, all of our, or many of our contributors feel confident enough to actually offer their own suggestions and to participate. So we have teachers and learners. We have people who are there just as enthusiasts of the language, people who are just cultural enthusiasts, and that leads to a great kind of sharing of knowledge and resources, and it develops itself, because as people ask questions or focus on specific areas, then it leads us into doing research and finding other supplementary content which we can then share with that, and that grows from that. So on the one hand, we're putting out resources for people to use. On the other hand, we're acting as a resource to match people up and also to respond and give expert advice where they need it. And then the third part that we do, which is for me the most, I think, interesting one, and one which I'm not aware of any other social media site doing in the same way, is we offer our language clinics, where we have each week we have an open forum, basically like this, where we have hundreds of people coming, well, tens of thousands of people coming, but hundreds of people asking questions, and we respond live, and conversations develop within that, dialogues, friendships develop, people then start communicating in separate areas, and from that we're able to actually get quite a dynamic, live, synchronous communication with a large audience, which then subsequently is available on the Facebook page as a resource, which people use for reference and so on after that. And that's really one of the main kind of things that we do. And I think it meets a lot of the questions we were talking about, how to filter. I see part of our role as to help people to filter, because I know myself how difficult it is to do that. It's what I do every day, and it's a struggle for someone whose job it is, for someone who's doing it as coming in for the first time. So we try to kind of pre-filter and help people to at least kind of go in the right direction, and to find easier steps to get where they want to go. In terms of appropriate social media, I'd agree with what David was saying earlier. You know, I mean, as a teacher, I never use Facebook with my class. I don't think it's useful. I don't think it's appropriate. It doesn't work with what I'm doing as a teacher. As a teacher, I use things like Edmodo, which are closed and which are controlled, and where you can focus it and where you can share all the resources you need and keep them in a more structured manner. With Facebook, it's an entirely different thing. Facebook's purpose for me is to promote as much authentic communication as possible, to engage the people who are already in that space and to give them the means to actually use that as a pedagogical tool to actually develop their language skills at the same time as taking advantage of the social function that works with that. So that's how we work with that, and that's me, I think, for that.
Great, thanks, Neil. That's really interesting stuff, and great to kind of see how you I think how you use the Facebook channels there for learners. And it's interesting where the kind of the last bit, I guess you were talking about with the filtering, and I think a lot of people do naturally gravitate perhaps towards one site like the Learn English Facebook page, where it kind of almost acts as a curation site, perhaps a bit like Scoop It and things like that, where they come because they know that's where they'll get the best kind of advice or the best resources for their needs.
Very much, it's like a live curation service rather than a static one.
Yeah, no, and it makes it very dynamic, and I think I liked, I think, as well, the fact that you're talking about lots and lots of people engaging, which we've looked at this week on the course. Or one of the things that we looked at was that feeling of confidence, and the confidence to take part and join in. Yeah. And Facebook, I think, is very good for that. It's very sort of non-threatening. I think people tend to kind of engage much more quickly on things like Facebook, where you're not anonymous, but there's that many people that are engaging on it that your comment is not necessarily going to be flagged up or stand out as I don't know, something that you don't want people to know about, or seem stupid or whatever, or It's
fascinating to see that, and I think that's one of the things that we focused on most is trying to create as much as possible a kind of classroom feel for the page, so that people do feel at home. We don't have a very formal kind of structure with that. We're very chatty. If people want to come on and just talk about their cat, then that's really no problem. And it's fascinating to watch the kind of development of regular contributors, because we've been doing this for a few years now, and I've seen people start, as you say, very hesitantly, and at, let's say, perhaps a A2 level, and over those 2 years, just by their regular participation in communication, and the fact that as you know, people are much more prone to write a lot and read a lot and communicate a lot more in a social media context than they are in a more formal context. You've seen them develop into a point where they're now. They've gone from kind of people who are just asking questions and being quite timid to people who are now offering advice, contributing, and are very confident in their language use within that. And to see that happen like live in that way is quite, I think, inspiring.
Definitely. No, I think it's great. I mean, the work that you've done and your team has done over the last few years has been amazing, really, to sort of see how it's developed. So, really good. I'm just a little bit aware of time. I would normally open this out a little bit more, but I'm just, as I said, I'm a little bit aware of time. We've got, in theory, 15 minutes or so left. So I'm going to go over to you, Kate, and let you take over.
Okay. Thanks very much, Paul. I just wanted to actually sneakily add, although you've handed over to me, onto what Neil was just saying there about social media, encouraging conversation. There's an example from here at the University of Southampton. One of my colleagues who teaches Italian has been, Alessia Plutino is her name, and she's been using Twitter with her Italian language students to talk about cultural awareness and Italian topics of conversation and so on, to get conversation going. And one of the things she said was that actually Twitter replicates natural conversation really well, because you have to respond quite quickly, you have to be quite concise, you have to make your comments quite relevant, it's quite fast moving. And so actually she found that when she did a project using Twitter outside of the class to get students talking about things in Italian, actually their fluency increased and their accuracy and kind of their confidence as well. So I think it's one of these areas that social media can really help, certainly with language learning, and so it follows on really from what you were saying about Facebook. Anyway, so yes, briefly, I'm at the University of Southampton. I'm a senior academic coordinator for technology enhanced learning, and I'm the course designer for this course. My background is in language teaching, an English language teacher for many years, and then got involved in technology, and now I do various research projects and I design online courses a lot of the time. So for me, one of the exciting things about social media and language learning and teaching is the opportunity for the creation of your own resources and your own work, and then open sharing it to add into that connectivist kind of map of the world, where we're all contributing different things and we can learn from each other. And I've done a fair amount of work looking at creating online spaces, repositories for teaching and learning resources, which teachers can mostly share and use, but also learners can access too. And I've worked with all sorts of teachers, teaching all sorts of languages, working in universities or working in schools, exploring, how they share, why they want to share their material, what are the challenges, what are the benefits to doing that. And one of the things certainly we found as far as some languages go, particularly community-based languages or languages that are known as less widely taught languages, certainly in the UK that would be things like Bengali or Punjabi, Polish perhaps, things like that, where teachers are sharing resources, then it's easier for language learners across the world to find them and to continue those languages and to keep those languages going. And I think that's a really valuable aspect towards social sharing of language resources, especially teaching resources. So one of the great things about the way the web has developed over the last few years, is the creation of these social sites which allow sharing, like Flickr or Toondo or Google, or there are thousands of them, allowing you to actually create stuff, put it out there, other learners can have a look and use it and tweak it and change it, and each individual takes what they need from what they find on the internet, and we can't predict where they'll find that use or that interest. And I think that's why I would always encourage teachers to share their materials, and also increasingly in the university sector we're asking students to become engaged with open practice as well. So they might be involved in using social media or using technology to create resources as part of their learning, and then sharing them with the world so that fellow students can benefit from it, and also students in other places. So I think some of the benefits from sharing your work in that way is sharing your knowledge and experience, being able to get ideas from others, saves you time as a teacher, helps you find more focused resources, and also helps you find more authentic ideas and authentic materials. As we know, as all language teachers know, it's always a constant challenge to find authentic and good learning material out there, and it's an ongoing process we have to engage with all the time. And so it's really useful to find particular sites that teachers use for sharing, and also sites, jobs that, like Neil, for example, who does that pre-filtering for you and finds resources that you can look at and you know are more likely to suit you or not in your classes. Certainly it's a challenge to how do you find good material. So certainly I'd encourage all of you out there who are teaching or learning a language to, if you're creating resources, share them with the world. Make sure you're licensing them carefully, perhaps with a Creative Commons license, which allows people to use your work or to adapt it and take it further. Share your material with the world, and share that knowledge, and others will take from it what they need, and the learning process will continue. Certainly something we've also found with teaching practice is that you can build very good communities and knowledge networks through social media. Particularly, there's one very useful network which I use, which is the hashtag MFL Twitterati, and many of you may well be aware of that. If you use that hashtag on Twitter and you share your knowledge, there are many, many language teachers across the world who are sharing information that way, and certainly there are things that I've found out as a teacher through using that hashtag that I haven't come across in other places. And this is something that you can get involved in, and certainly start your own communities as well, sharing hashtags, getting communities of practice together. So there are certain sharing sites, so for example the Language Box or Loro in the UK, and I'll put those links underneath the video on the step after we finish this session. Also sites like the Times Education Supplement Connect, these are all places which you can access to find material, but also you can share your work as well. Make connections with the community, learn things, but also share your knowledge. So really, that was my focus. That's one of the aspects that I'm interested in with social media, this aspect of being able to share and open up with the world the things that you do as a teacher.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kate. That's, again, very, very interesting, and just sort of picking up, I think, a little bit on the, you're talking about sharing and communities of practice, which I think I know that there is a distinction between communities of practice and personal learning networks or professional learning networks. I'm never quite sure exactly what the distinction is, but I think that kind of that sort of community and that kind of transformation really that technology has afforded means that resources are shared far more widely, and obviously through these kind of personal learning networks and professional learning networks or communities of practice, you tend to kind of build, I think, much closer relationships. There's another one that I'd mention, I think, on top of the ones that you mentioned, which is one called ELT Chat, if anyone knows of that one, if you're an ELT teacher, which is a weekly Twitter chat for an hour. It's very sort of rapid fire. For an hour, where a topic is sort of crowdsourced or is voted upon by participants, and then that topic is dealt with over the course of the hour by professionals, by whoever wants to join in, basically, using the hashtag. And it kind of mirrors a little bit what we were doing on Wednesday with the Facebook chat. It's a similar kind of setup. If any of you watching this were involved in that, then it's a similar process. But if you wanted to get involved, if you are teachers and you wanted to get involved in ELT chat, then you need a Twitter account. It's on a Wednesday usually. I can't remember the exact time. I think it changes, and you just follow the hashtag ELT chat. Okay. Does anyone? I don't know if anyone wanted to respond. Communities of practice or PLNs, if you have any thoughts or your experiences about how you've kind of benefited perhaps from this and from sharing resources. If not, we can go through to some of the questions that have been coming through. One of them, can you all hear me okay, by the way? Am I breaking up, or am I okay?
Okay.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, this isn't so much a question, but more of a comment from Leonardo Sierra, who was talking about social media being a good way to learn, but the main problem is that the signal, in lots of cases, isn't good enough. And this is something, I think, a theme that's come through throughout the course, and perhaps on the chat here, is how we deal with these situations where it's a low-tech environment or even a no-tech environment, and the kind of the technology, particularly perhaps with synchronous conversations and asynchronous conversations, is asynchronous easier with weaker internet connections? What solutions are there in these environments?
Yeah, maybe I could pick up on that, Paul. I noticed some of the people here are there's somebody in Côte d'Ivoire, so bienvenue. I've travelled a little bit in Africa myself, and I've visited some schools a year or two ago in Malawi and saw very limited resources there, but the teachers in the schools there were making the best use of the connectivity that they had. This particular school that I visited, they had 4 computers, one of which was connected to the internet, and they made use of that within their context, obviously quite limited, but to be able to do some research, sort of find out extra classroom materials. So it's kind of like the PLN, sort of personal learning network, but for the whole school, being able to do that in terms of teacher development and also information for the sort of for the kids as well. So I mean, that was one sort of practical example of low resource contexts. Probably most schools aren't. If you're interested in seeing that, incidentally, there's the British Council teacher training course available on the online teacher on teaching English website. There's a unit on teaching with low resources, so you can find out more information there. But I think asynchronous is the key, because with asynchronous connections, you can do an awful lot. Things like this Google Hangout. Obviously, it takes quite a high bandwidth to be able to do, so you need good connectivity. But if it's asynchronous, then you can just sort of sit and sort of wait for the communications to come in, and then you can have a conversation sort of slowly over time. Any other thoughts?
Okay, Chris. Neil, sorry.
No, I mean, I think this is something which is changing very, very rapidly. And I know, for example, 1 year ago, 18 months ago, we had zero audience in Myanmar, and Myanmar is now our third biggest country, for example, and it's purely through mobile technology to work with that. And I think the increase in mobile access for this is moving so rapidly now that I think penetration to areas which at the moment were broadband and so on is obviously not quite as established will change rapidly. That was all.
Okay. Okay. Another question here is from Shahid Abbas Ansari, and I think, obviously, I don't know what context we all work in necessarily. I think we all work largely with well, certainly Kate, obviously with university students. But there is a question about young learners, and it might be a question of safety as well, online safety. But in terms of using technology, in terms of using the social media for language learning with young learners, what advice would you have for that?
Well, social media and young learners is a really interesting topic for me. It's something I've done quite a lot with my own groups of young learners in Spain and in Hong Kong. And just checking everyone can hear me okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, you don't need to use something like Facebook. You could use sites that have been mentioned before that are secure and designed for young learners in education, like Schoology or Edmodo. You can also create things like a class blog or a class wiki to develop a wide range of skills with young learners. Also, there are lots of ways of using digital games in the classroom, of designing language learning tasks around these games. Learn English Kids and Learn English Teens are great British Council websites with lots of activities, and they have a big social element as well, where children and teens can communicate together in a very secure, safe environment. And
the mobile apps as well, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I just add that it's not, we obviously with university learners, there's a different situation from using social media with younger learners, but certainly something that we always do if we're building any kind of social media aspect into our teaching is to make sure we always start off with a session on digital identity and the safeguarding of personal information. The internet is a very unforgiving archive.
Yeah.
Although Google can delete things for you now, we always say to our students, think about what you're putting on there. Think about it being there forever. Would you want it there? And also, we try and make that an active process. Getting students to make e-portfolios to actually curate their presence online, so that they can make that work for them in getting jobs or just in their life in general. I remember hearing someone say something. Don't put anything online that you wouldn't let your mother see. Which maybe is quite a good thing to bear in mind. But I think certainly we're in a world where we're trying to get our students to think about these things and actually take an active control of it, be in control of it, rather than having information out there and then being a prey to whatever's out there, that can be held against you in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. There are lots of questions, and I don't think we're going to get time for any more. We might have one more. I think this probably comes under the umbrella of the future, and online learning and using social media for language learning, and just the kind of, I guess, how we feel about that and about how things are evolving in the future. And some of them are some of the sort of views are perhaps a little bit, I don't know, possibly dystopian a little bit. In terms of the dangers of online, and meaning that the students that you have don't get the attention they necessarily need, that will forget how to communicate in a face-to-face, or how to teach perhaps in a face-to-face environment. There's that, but there's also the question about a competency-based approach and connectivism, which I kind of think we probably want to feed in. And really the question is the similarities and differences between a competency-based approach and connectivism. Chris, I don't know if you wanted to pick up on that one. or if one of you wanted to pick up on that one.
Yeah, we had a question about this. I'm not sure, Paul, if you can remember who put the question.
It was Emmanuel Ali.
Yeah, I mean,
this one, I think.
yeah, I thought this was a really interesting question. It was about the connections between competency-based frameworks and connectivism. And obviously, I think this is very interesting because there is a slight challenge to connectivism, I think, from a competency-based framework, in the sense that one of the ideas in connectivism is that it's very learner-centered, that you can come into a connectivist-style course and you can find the connections that you want for your own learning. So it's a very learner-driven, self-determined kind of approach. And that obviously is different from a teacher-centered approach or a curriculum-centered approach. But I think for me, with a competency-based framework, often there's an implication of a strong presence of a teacher. You know, the strong presence of a curriculum whereby you're specifying competencies which have to be reached, behaviours which have to be learnt, and you have to acquire these things. And that seems in some ways to challenge a bit with that idea of learner-centeredness. I don't think that's necessarily always the case. They don't have to contradict each other. Certainly you can have overarching competencies or learning outcomes you want to achieve, and then perhaps get to those places you know, by using a more connectivist, student-centered kind of approach. But there does seem to be a kind of challenge there. And certainly I'll put a link, again, on the step afterwards to a blog post about competency-based frameworks and connectivism, which people might find useful to think about and take further. Coming back to something that we talked to earlier, I mean, for me as a teacher, I like to mix and match from lots of different places and to see how I can achieve my learning outcomes as best I can. And if that's looking at connectivist or learner-centered methods, those are the things that I like to, that's the kind of philosophy I like to inform my teaching. But also, of course, you always have to achieve certain outcomes, certainly for exams, and certainly in any kind of course design. And so, you know, you mix and match from different approaches. But I accept that there is a sort of inherent idea of contradiction there, perhaps, with competency-based frameworks and connectivism. Chris, I don't know what you'd add to that.
Yeah, I was thinking that to some extent, I mean, it depends what kind of learners we're thinking about, and also depends on who's the one who's writing the competencies. So about sort of curriculum design, syllabus design. If we're thinking about, for example, adult learners, maybe a business English context, what's required, people need to have the competencies to do a job. Same for teacher development, teacher training. Teachers need to have the competencies to carry out that job. But if those competencies are written in such a way that you know, it's what you need to do, what you need to be able to do, that is the competency. How you get there, maybe you're already there in for certain competencies. Maybe you're here in some, maybe you're here in others. So that's where, to my mind, the connectivism comes in, because then you go and you find the learning that you need, and then you get yourself that competency. I think that fits much more with sort of adult education. In terms of young learners, I think maybe it's a little bit more limited, but I think the principles can still apply.
Okay, great. Okay, Chris, thank you very much for your answer. Neil and David, I don't know if you wanted to contribute to that. I am just aware of time. We've run over by nearly 10 minutes. So, as I said, I mean, I know there are lots of questions that you've been posting on there, and if you wanted to post them on the MOOC, on the steps on the MOOC over the next few days, we can try and answer as many of those as we can, or maybe between participants you can also answer them together or discuss them together. Okay, we're going to stop now, I'm afraid. We're going to, because as I say, we have run out of time. Hopefully you're all looking forward to next week, week 4, and I apologise again in advance if you can hear the dog outside barking.
We can.
I'll get it, I need a gun. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, as I was saying, I hope you're looking forward to next week, week 4, where you'll be hearing from researchers at the University of Southampton who are going to be studying the impact of using English as a lingua franca, as well as the controversies around the increasing spread of English. So I hope you're looking forward to that, and thank you again to
It seems that Paul has frozen.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, Paul is frozen, so let's just say thank you and goodbye, I think.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul.